Okay, good morning. We are in fact starting from the beginning of the chapter a second time, which is okay because there's so much to talk about and we're not in a rush. We intend to finish this whenever it happens. This last Shabbos in Shul, we learned a mimer. That's a Hasidic discourse. And we realized that half a mimer is a whole mimer. One paragraph is a whole lesson for life. It doesn't have to be the whole mimer. You could just learn anything, any piece, any part, and you've really covered. You've really taken home something that you can chew over for a whole week. Now, we will begin from chapter 4, reminding ourselves where we're coming from. We are coming from chapter 3. In chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe taught us about the 10 soul powers. What are the 10 soul powers? Everyone can turn on your cameras so that we can see each other. Your picture is not being recorded. I figured out how to do it. Your picture is not being recorded on the video. So we could mamish turn on our cameras and see each other and learn together without having your pictures recorded. The marvels of modern medicine. Media. What are the 10 soul powers? The 10 soul powers are intellect, emotion, 3 intellectual, 7 emotion, null, and they are Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. These, the Alter Rebbe calls the essence of the soul. They are the nature. They are what the soul is. Oh, you're going to say, wait a minute. We were learning the whole time that the essence of the soul is a piece of God. We're talking about the divine soul. And yes, the essence of the divine soul is a piece of God. And sometimes Hasidus describes the essence of the soul or the nature of the soul as unfathomable, unknowable, because it is a veritable piece of Hashem from on high. And yet, here the Alter Rebbe is saying that the actual soul itself is made of 10 powers. And we discovered that there are 3 levels to the soul. There is the core that doesn't function. There is no function at the core level. Then there is the essential function, the internal function, also known as the subconscious function of the soul. And then there is the conscious function of the soul. And to bring out this point, the Alter Rebbe is teaching us how we can live a successful life as servants of Hashem, even while we are not tzaddikim, even while we are not perfectly righteous, while we are in the category of beinanim, which means average people who struggle with tendencies to do the wrong thing, but always have the ability to make the right choices. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that we are going to worry about the functionality of the soul, the subconscious functionality of the soul, and the conscious functionality of the soul. And in order to get us started, we have a special treat today. I tried to get him to speak to us in person. He doesn't do Zoom. I don't blame him. Zoom is what it is. But Baruch Hashem, we have a great privilege. I'm just stealing from his YouTube channel. So here we go. This is Rabbi Miller. Chaim Miller wrote such a fantastic version of Tanya. And this is his introduction, his 5-minute introduction to chapter 4, where he gives us the synopsis. He tells us, let's remember what the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us. Here we go, Rabbi Chaim Miller. Sometimes.
In chapter 4, the Tanya is going to teach us something very fundamental. It's such a profound insight that the whole of the rest of the book depends on this. And if you take it to heart, it will be a guiding light for the rest of your life. And that is that the human being is really split into 2 halves. Today we would call it a conscious and a subconscious. And the Tanya refers to this as the garments of the soul and the deep core of the soul. The garments of the soul is what's happening in your conscious behavior. It's your thoughts, anything you say, anything you do. These are all outward expressions of the soul. The inward element of the soul, which you can't really discern because it's more subtle than thought, it's what leads to thought, is the deep core of the soul. So whatever kind of chatter is going on in your head, whatever thoughts pop into your head, that's all coming out of the deep core and manifesting in the garment or the conscious faculty of thought. Now, why is this so important? Because the fundamental thesis of the Tanya, its main point, which it does not veer from throughout the 53 chapters of the Tanya, is that we are here as human beings to focus on our garments, not on our deep core. God didn't give us the ability to change who we are deep down. Are we good? Have you ever thought of the question, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Am I fundamentally good? Am I fundamentally bad? The Tanya's answer to that question would be both. You're fundamentally good and you're fundamentally bad. You have a divine soul, which is deeply good, and you have an animal soul, which is selfish and leans towards the bad. And you're not going to change that deep core of either of those souls. It's not within reach. That's the Tanya's assertion. Can't change the deep core. You can't change whatever's popping into your head. But what you can do is influence the garments and the conscious behaviors, even at the level of thought. If you're having a negative thought, you could replace it with a positive thought. If you're contemplating doing something bad, you can choose to contemplate doing something good. All that's within your power. So the message of the Tanya in chapter 4 is, we are here to focus on our garments, on our powers of thought, speech, and action. That's what's within our control. We can't control what pops into our thoughts, but we can control what we choose to think about, what we choose to say, and what we choose to do. And an upshot of that is a very profound thing, that you might think, well, what's my deepest connection to God? Am I deeply connected with the essence of my soul? Or am I more connected in what I say and do? And the Zohar teaches that the Torah is in fact the wisdom and will of God. The Torah and God are one. And what does the Torah tell us to do? The Torah tells us how to act, how to speak, and even what to think. But it doesn't tell you what to do in your subconscious self, in your deep core. So it turns out, says the Tanya, according to the Zohar's understanding, the true deepest connection of God, when he really gave us his very essence, is through our garments, not through our deep core. How you could be deeply corrupt inside, but nevertheless, as long as you don't express that corruption in your thought, in your speech, in your action, and you consciously control what you think and what you do and what you say, it doesn't really matter what's inside, because you're never going to change that. You can attach yourself to God through your garments, and that is the most profound connection of all. Why? Because the Torah is God's revelation to us, and in the Torah he told us how to do all our garments. So that's the deep, deep revelation of chapter 4, a real balm, a real mind-blowing insight that we are here to deal with our garments, and our deepest connection to God is through those garments of thought, speech, and action, which are within your control.
Okay. So now, having said that, now we realize what is the overarching question of chapter 4. Perek Daled, we're going to read every word with the following question in mind. What is so important about garments? What is so special? Why does Torah make such a big deal out of garments? And in his classes, there's a great teacher of Tanya named Rabbi Naftali Silverberg. And he's almost finished the whole Tanya on YouTube also. He's a great teacher. Kaponim. He asks the following, he draws the following analogy. He says, let's say in a human relationship, what's the most important thing? Let's say a person wants to be nice to another person. So they send gifts, yeah? But deep down, they don't like the other person. They have no interest in being in a relationship with the other person. Is this a good relationship or is this a bad relationship? let's use a closer analogy. A husband and a wife. The husband brings flowers every day, but doesn't really like his wife. Is that good or is that not good? If there is not loud noises behind you, feel free to unmute your microphone the whole time. I remember this is our ongoing policy now. We want to be able to communicate with each other, not just by nodding, but also by grunting and other things like that.
But then it's not a real relationship. It's fake.
Exactly. Exactly so. In a human relationship, if there are no feelings behind the action becomes, maybe not in the first try. In the first try, it might be impressive, but after a while, it becomes meaningless. Therefore, we might learn a lesson from the human version of relationships to our spiritual relationship, our connection to Hashem, that if there is no feeling behind the action, that the action is meaningless. That means that the most important part of our connection to Hashem should be what we think. I'm sorry, what our emotions are. Are we feeling the awe and reverence? Are we feeling the love, the attraction, the yearning? If yes, and from there we do a mitzvah, fantastic. If not, then of what use is the mitzvah? It's just flowers without any love. It's chocolates without any kindness.
Fake it till you make it.
Oh, very good. So that's one argument that everybody who learns Chassidus realizes it's an acceptable argument in Chassidus. A man came to the Alter Rebbe one time and said, "Dear Rebbe, your Chassidim, what are you doing? You're training a bunch of frauds. They're pretending to be holy, and they're not holy." And the Alter Rebbe said, the Gemara teaches that if a person pretends to be lame or blind or suffer from some other ailment, there is a guarantee that he will not, that before he dies, he will end up being that. Yeah. And therefore, in Jewish tradition, we're very particular not to pretend to be unwell in any way, shape, or form. Not even in a game, not even in our Purim costumes. So the Alter Rebbe said, from there we learn, we have that if you pretend something, you're guaranteed to be that thing eventually. And if that's true about the negative, if it's true about the negative, and we know in Torah that the positive outweighs the negative by like 500 times. Yeah, I don't remember what the math is, but Hashem says, well, I'll ask you, how long does Hashem carry over the punishment for an evil person? How many generations?
4, 3, 4.
3 or 4, right? And how many generations does Hashem carry over the blessing and the reward for a good person? How many generations?
1,000 generations.
Well, yeah, it says thousands in the plural. So that means at least 2,000 generations. So what's the difference? How do you compare? What is the percentage difference between, in other words, how many more times is the good than the evil? If the good is thousands, a minimum of 2,000 versus the number 4, the good completely overwhelms and overpowers. Right. I don't know how to do that math. Anyway.
Neither.
Where's Ishayahu? Come on.
500 times more.
500 times more.
500
Good.
times 4 is 2,000.
Baruch Hashem, we got the answer right. Thank God. So that's the thing then. The Alter Rebbe said, if it's true about something negative, that if you pretend to be it, you will become it. If you pretend it, you will become it. Then 500 times more so, if you pretend to be something good, then before a person dies, they will become that thing. And that's the Hasidic argument of fake it till you make it. Or as a friend of mine once argued, fake it till your children make it. And then, and then you're good. Then you have promulgated the Jewish people. You have anyway, fine. So that's one argument is if you'll do it, eventually it'll change you. Good. But what are you changing? You might not even be changing your emotion. You may just merely be changing your habits. You may just be developing better habits. Previously, I had habits that were self-oriented. Now I have habits that are service-oriented. Do I love God more now that my habits are service-oriented? Am I a more divine, special person? No, not necessarily. There's two things. Again, borrowing from Rabbi Silverberg. Says there's two things. There is what you are, and there is what you do. Some people are very holy people, yeah, but they never did anything. And some people are actively good people, but deep down they're corrupt. Examples: you have a tzaddik who is well known to us, and he's called the Baal Shem Tov. Do we know the history of the Baal Shem Tov soul? We shared it in this class many times. I'll tell you the brief version. There was a tumult in heaven. There was a big excitement in heaven because there was a man who did such a great mitzvah on the day of his bar mitzvah that God alone, he kept it as his treasure, his secret, and wouldn't share it. So the heavenly court wanted to know, what is this great mitzvah? So they sent Eliyahu Hanavi. They sent Eliyahu Hanavi to visit this person and to find out what the secret mitzvah was that he performed on his bar mitzvah day. This man was not a learned man. He was a simple man. And Eliyahu Hanavi came to him and said, young man, I will learn with you. I will teach you the entire Torah on my level. In other words, I'll reveal to you the entire Torah with all of its secrets on condition that you tell me what is the great mitzvah that you performed on the day of your bar mitzvah. The man said, excuse me, my mitzvah is between me and Hashem, nobody else. So thank you very much, not interested. So Eliyahu Hanavi goes back to the heavenly court, and now the heavenly court is truly in an uproar. And they made the following ruling. They said, because the man was willing to give up such a tremendous benefit, such a tremendous gift, in order to preserve his connection to Hashem in a humble and pure and private manner, therefore Eliyahu Hanavi has to go back down and learn with him the entire Torah anyway, and he doesn't have to share the secret. So that's what happened. Eliyahu Hanavi went down, revealed to him the entire Torah, and the man became a fantastic tzaddik and a big Talmud Chacham you can imagine. Eliyahu Hanavi is teaching him. On top of that, he maintained his very simple lifestyle. Nobody knew that this person had transformed into a tremendous tzaddik. He continued to live a very simple life. This soul arrives in heaven. You can imagine the fanfare that greeted him when he arrived in the heavenly court. And they were going to give him a very rich place in the yeshiva of heaven. But one angel spoke up timidly and said, wait a minute. This soul is lacking something. This soul lived on earth for so many years and never helped anybody. Such a great soul, and he never benefited anybody. Something's wrong. That is not correct. That's not the way to live. And the heavenly court could not disagree. And so they sent this soul back to earth with all of its original powers and then some, right? Because you never go back without an increase. That would be a pure punishment. And this tzaddik was not needing a punishment. He was just needing a correction. So they sent him back to earth, plus improvements, in order to use his divine strength and spiritual power to help people. And that's the story of the Baal Shem Tov's neshama. That he was sent back to earth, stronger than he was in the previous lifetime, with a greater teacher than he had in the previous lifetime. Who's a greater teacher than Eliyahu Hanavi? Who could possibly be a greater teacher than Eliyahu Hanavi? Answer is the person that taught Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi was a student of a prophet named Achia Hashiloini. Achia Hashiloini was the judge, the shofet, before Eliyahu Hanavi took the role of leadership among the Jewish people. Who is Achia Hashiloini? He was a young boy when the Jewish people left Egypt. He stood at Mount Sinai. In his generation, he was a simple person. But as the generations went on and they become spiritually weaker and weaker, his stature in the community rose and rose until he was the greatest spiritual person in the generation. He became the leader. He stood at Mount Sinai. He walked through the split sea. He taught the Baal Shem Tov the secrets of Torah on his level, the way Eliyahu Hanavi was taught them. That means that, instead of learning from Eliyahu Hanavi a second time, like this soul had done in a previous lifetime, now this soul was taught by a higher level teacher, the one who taught Eliyahu Hanavi himself. That's why the Baal Shem Tov learned from Achia HaSheleni.
How do you say the name again?
Achia. Yeah, Achia is a popular Hebrew name these days. Achia. And the last name is Hashiloini, the man from Shilon.
Thank you.
So you have a powerfully spiritual person who accomplishes little, and you have spiritually mute people who accomplish tremendous things. Like the boy who did the great mitzvah on the day of his bar mitzvah. He was a nobody, and he did something fantastic. Yeah, so in one lifetime, you have these two examples. A simple person spiritually who did a tremendous thing, and a spiritually powerful person who didn't do relatively, much. Fine. We have these two things. We have and there's separate parts of the person. Who you are as a human being might be powerful, but what you are capable of doing, what you actually choose to do in this lifetime, that's a separate question. And this is the difference between chapter 3 of Tanya and chapter 4 of Tanya. Chapter 3 of Tanya tells us, who are you? What is the nature of your spiritual makeup? Do you have very refined sensibilities? Are you a very spiritually attuned human being? Is your mind open? Is your heart open to messages from Hashem and spiritual experiences, which changes gradually over your lifetime, but never really transforms. Rarely does a person completely switch to become a different kind of human being. That's why the analogy of garments is so appropriate. We have it in the notes here from last week as well. In the notes we shared, why is there this analogy of garments? It's because, so last week we said the analogy of garments is not perfect because actual garments are truly separate from the body. Thought, speech, and action are only separate from the intellect and emotions, but they're very much a part of the soul. They're extensions of the soul. That's fine. Then why are we called garments? Why are we calling them garments? And this we did not say last week. This we will borrow from a teacher of Hasidus whose name is Kaidaner, in a book that he wrote, Commentary on Tanya. And he says, here is the difference. The 10 soul powers, the Eser Koichos HaNefesh, the 10 soul powers, and they are Chabad, Chagas, Nehim, Chochma Bina Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. 10 soul powers, the Eser Koichos HaNefesh, they are true and consistent. They don't change. Chochma is Chochma. Let's leave Chabad alone for a second. Chagas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. The attribute of kindness and love will never feel the opposite of kindness and love. The kindness and the love can be expressed in many ways. It's colored. Yeah. Kindness and love can be expressed through generosity, or kindness and love can be expressed through restraint. That's, in Kabbalistic terms, that's called chesed shebechesed, when kindness is expressed through generosity, or it could be expressed through restraint. That's called gvura shebechesed, the restraint within the loving kindness. But it's always only going to be kindness and love. Chesed cannot become anger or hatred. It can't. That's just not what it is. And it never changes. On the other hand, you have gvura. Gvura is hatred, Gevura is anger. Gevura is discipline, judgment, justice. Gevura never feels love. That's just not what it is. Judgment, justice, even hatred and anger can be expressed through generosity. You want to come up with an analogy, or should I?
Kill someone with kindness?
Yes, it's a famous thing. You kill them with kindness. You'll torment them because they hate you and you hate them, and they know it, and you just pour on the kindness. The person withers up in his because you take away his dignity. At least let me hate you. You don't even let me hate you. You have to be so nice. Now, this is from the godly soul. The godly soul has hatred and anger as well. How does it have hatred and anger? Only because it struggles against the animal. If it didn't have to struggle against the animal, it would not have to have anger and hatred.
So hatred for bad things, not
Yes.
hatred for.
Correct. So wherever in the Torah, God is described as flaring up with anger, yeah?
Yeah.
Or when God is described as hating certain things, the godly soul flares up with anger about the same things, and the godly soul hates those same things. Anger and hatred, but that belongs in the realm of, that belongs to the attribute of gvura. Gvura, restraint, anger, judgment, severity. That's what it is. It will never love. It will never love. That's not what it does. You know that the attribute of compassion will never love. The attribute of compassion is, I will be generous to you even if I don't love you. These things never change, but the garments can change. What's a garment? A garment is, today I'm wearing a blue shirt. Did you notice? It's because I had to reach all the way to the back of the closet to find something to wear this morning. It happens. Usually we don't have to choose. It's just black and white. Literally black and white, what I'm wearing today. Today we have to reach, you have to be creative. Fine. So, but tomorrow I won't wear blue. Tomorrow this shirt will hang in the closet. It could come on and off. This shirt can wear the human, or it cannot wear the human. The garment doesn't have to wear the human. It could. Sometimes it could. Sometimes it doesn't. One garment can wear several humans. Yeah? The Purim costume, I can tell you, we had this one piece of Purim costume that rotated around the whole family over Purim. Yeah, it took turns wearing all the various humans in our family. This one piece of Purim costume. That's the point. The garment is not a true and consistent being. In as much as thought is intellectual, and emotions and speech is mostly emotional, and action is mostly creative or whatever, expressive, that's a consistent, they are constant. But what they are expressing, they're not married to anything. They're not tied to anything. Sometimes your thoughts are loving. That means your thoughts are wearing kindness. Sometimes your thoughts are not loving, and that means that they are wearing severity. Sometimes your thoughts are compassionate. Your thoughts can switch bodies. Yeah? Same thing with your words. Your words could be loving, or your words can be hateful. And so on and so forth it goes. That's why the analogy of garments is so beautiful. So beautiful, because we realize that even when your heart, your feelings are in one place, because an emotion fills you up. When you're feeling one emotion, if you're truly feeling, you don't have room for another emotion. You cannot feel love and hatred at the same time. In your brain, you can be aware of love and hatred at the same time, but you cannot feel them both at the same time. Yeah? Why in your brain can you wear both? because it's only thoughts. Thoughts don't have to be one or the other. So at the same time, you can be overwhelmed with thoughts of love for one thing and thoughts of hatred for another thing, but your heart will feel only one thing.
Never ambivalence, never mixed emotions.
I believe that, good question. First of all, good question. I think that mixed emotions is not a proper feeling. It's a sense of confusion or a sense of right. That is by itself one of the, a separate emotion. Yeah, confusion. I'm not sure. That's a whole feeling.
Where does that come from? Where does the confusion come from? The inability to define what the motivation is?
It's a good question. Also a very good question. I believe it's an inability to decide whether the thing is good for you or bad for you. So I think it's an intellectual issue, not an emotional one. Because once you choose if it's good for you, you'll love it. And if you chose it's bad for you, then you'll hate it. But you have to make a choice. So it's an intellectual question. It's a das question. It's not even a chachma bina question. It's a bina das question. You have to make a choice. And then you'll either love it or hate it. You'll either be attracted to it or you'll be repulsed by it. Okay? This is the beauty of the analogy of the garment. And that's what Rabbi Miller was saying in his introduction. Tanya is emphasizing you don't have to be in your essence anything. Torah never asked you to be anything other than what you are. Torah is asking us to do the right thing, to say the right thing, and to think the right thing. Now let's read the chapter. Perek Daled, read with me, not literally, but we'll read and translate and see what we could pull out of the words. Ve'oid, in addition to what? In addition to the Eser Koiches HaNefesh, in addition to the 10 soul powers. Chabad, Chagas, Nehim, Chochma Bin Adas, Chesed Gevura Tif'eres, Netzach Hod Yesod Malchus. In addition to those, Yesh Lechol Nefesh Elikis, every divine soul has, meaning it's part of the soul, unlike human garments that are literally separate from the human, the divine soul actually has as part of its makeup 3 garments. Shalosh Livushim, and we already discussed the beauty of the analogy of garments. Shehem, what are these garments? Machshava, bringing something to your conscious thought. I don't know this for sure. I haven't seen it written anywhere. But machashava to me seems like choosing your priorities, bringing something to the front of your consciousness by choosing to make it the most chashuv of all the things going on in your head. So maybe it's connected to the word chashivos or cheshboid. You're choosing to mull it over, or you are choosing to prioritize it. The mem before means to cause or to make it. Chashiva, like importance or calculation. So you have machashava, which is a choice to think about something. You're bringing it into your garment of thought. Dibur, the act of speaking, and ma'aseh, to make something acted upon, to bring out an action. But because these are the divine soul's thought, speech, and action, they must only be shel taryag mitzvahs haTorah. When do you know that you're wearing the garments of your divine soul and not your animal soul? You only know this for certain if what you are doing, saying, and thinking is one of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, because the divine soul is incapable of doing anything else, thinking anything else, saying anything else. If anything else comes into your mind, if anything else comes out of your mouth, if anything else is being performed by your hands and feet, that's not the garments of the godly soul, that's the animal soul. And the Rebbe explains, She, this means, Kishe ha'adam, when a person, Mekayim b'maise, fulfills in action, Kol mitzvahs maisiyos. This could be translated as all the action mitzvahs, or it could be translated as any action mitzvahs. What would be the difference between any and all? We'll leave it for now. We'll come back to it in a minute.
If you do one, you're doing any, but all means you have to do everything.
Very
So
good.
it's the smallest amount, or it's the entire
Wow.
Torah.
You raised an idea that I think is very good, and I hadn't thought of it before. And that is what the Baal Shem Tov tells us, that if you're teifes b'miktsasei, you are teifes b'kulei. If you grab something that is an essence, something that is an essential being, if you grab a portion of it, you've grabbed all of it. So by doing one mitzvah, you have grabbed all of Hashem. Yeah, you have grabbed all of your divine soul. Yeah. But that's not enough. Why? Because the divine soul, although the divine soul itself is an essence, it does have limbs and organs, meaning it has many purposes that all have to be fulfilled. Okay? So in the moment, in each and every moment, in the micro picture, we'll say any. If you'll do any mitzvah, you will be clothing yourself, you will be donning the garments of the divine soul. But in the macro, in the big picture, we have to make sure we fulfill all of them so that we can fulfill the entire purpose of the divine soul. Okay, very good. Thank you. Question?
Does anybody do all the mitzvahs?
Very, very good question. We will look into a separate source to see if we can find some advice on that question.
But how can you? Because some are done by the Kohen, some are done by a man, so a woman can't.
Excellent.
Is there anything that only a woman does that a man does not do, or that a?
Sure.
I mean.
Sure.
Huh.
Can you think of one?
I mean, separating challah.
Man does it too.
Right.
Does it too.
My husband is the challah maker in the family, but he says, "Come take
Correct.
challah." So he
Correct.
doesn't do that. What else?
We'll think about it. When we get to that question, we'll see it in the sources down below. When we'll revisit this question. In the meantime, we'll have to think hard. So, when a person fulfills b'maisa in action, call mitzvahs maisiyos, any or all action mitzvahs, ubedibur, or through his words, when he's actively speaking, hu oisek, what is he using his speech for? Bepeirush kol taryag mitzvahs v'hilchesehen. He is working on explaining verbally all the 613 mitzvahs and their laws. Uvemachshava, and in his thoughts, he's choosing humasig kol ma she'efshar lahasig bepashtei ramzei and derashes v'seides haTorah. He's working hard to understand all the levels of Torah explanation. We went through them last week. What is pshat, what's remez, what's drush, and what's seid, and what's the fifth level called Chassidus, which is the soul of all the four levels and brings them all together, as the Rebbe explains beautifully and at length in a booklet called "The Purpose of the Torah Sahasi," the purpose of the teachings of Chassidus. When a person does this, he's acting on the action mitzvahs, and he's speaking the explanations of the mitzvahs, and he is thinking the understanding of the Torah. Then then the general 613 limbs of his divine soul are clothed in the 613 garments of the Torah. They're clothed in the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. So we ask the question, how is it possible that a person should fulfill all the mitzvahs? The question that some of the commentaries ask is, why is it that here he says, Mekayim kol mitzvahs ma'asiyos? He simply says, you'll do all the action mitzvahs, that when it comes to action. And in thought, he says, you'll grasp whatever you're capable of grasping. But when it comes to speech, he says, you toil in the explanation of all the 613 mitzvahs. Why that? Why bring it up? Why not say, you speak about whatever you could speak about? Just like he said, you do whatever you can do and you think whatever you can think. Why change it and say you'll toil in all the 613? Because it's possible to fulfill every single mitzvah by studying the Torah portion about it. We learned to Neshalm Parim Sfaseinu means our lips will make up for the sacrifices that we cannot offer. In the temple, there are supposed to be animal sacrifices and meal sacrifices and gift offerings and peace offerings, and we can't offer them these days. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. So what do? Neshalma parim sfaseinu. We repay, we make up for the deficit by studying the Torah portion of that offering, and that's why part of the order of davening every single day is to read the Torah portions about the various sacrifices that should have been brought every single day.
So that last week's parsha, Tetzaveh, all the construction of the levush of the Kohanim, and all that in the building of the Mishkan. So we actually, by studying that, we fulfill that mitzvah, right?
Right. Yeah. By studying that, we fulfill that mitzvah. And the Rebbe said, if we'll study the laws of the base, if we'll study the details of the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, if we'll study the laws of building the third Beis Hamikdash, if we'll do that frequently enough and often enough, that means we will have fulfilled the mitzvah of building the third Beis Hamikdash frequently enough and often enough, we'll actually be able to do it physically. What does this tell us? How does this help us with our question? How is it possible for one human being to fulfill all the mitzvahs? You can fulfill all the mitzvahs through your Torah study. Every single mitzvah you can fulfill, which is why learning Rambam is so important. Because Rambam is the only book that covers all the mitzvahs. All other codes of Jewish law address modern issues, relevant issues. Rambam covers everything. But there's more. Let's take a look at the footnote from Likutei from Torah, page 98, the third column. This is in a footnote, a parenthetical note that I assume was written by the Tzemach Tzedek, because the Tzemach Tzedek edited Likutei Torah and Torah and added his notes in parentheses. So I suppose this was added by the Tzemach Tzedek. Hine. Behold, al mitzvahs, regarding mitzvahs, nemar, it says, where does it say? Bizoyar, shehem bechinas levushin, that mitzvahs are like garments. He's quoting the Zoyar. And that means, shekol echad mi Yisrael, every single Jew, tzarich lekayim, has to fulfill, kol hataryag mitzvahs, all of the 613 mitzvahs, levad, with an exception. We do not have to fulfill, in other words, each and every Jew does not have to fulfill mitzvahs hamelech. Mitzvahs that are obligated, mitzvahs in which only the king is obligated in. What are mitzvahs like? I'll give you one example. One example is that the king has to write for himself a second Torah scroll to keep it with him at all times. Every Jew is not obligated to write that second Torah scroll, only a king. And the king, shehamelech hu moitzi kol Yisrael. When the king does this, then he fulfills that mitzvah on behalf of all the Jewish people. When the king does it, we have all been yotze the mitzvah. V'chol hamitzvahs mechuyav kol echad lekayim. All the rest of the mitzvahs, every person is obligated to fulfill them. And therefore, what shall we do if a person is not a kohen? Or what should we do if a person is a kohen? A kohen has to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, bless the Jewish people. A non-kohen has to give certain gifts and make certain appearances in the Beis Hamikdash. If you're a kohen, you miss out on those gifts and on those appearances. If you are a non-kohen, then you miss out on the service in the Beis Hamikdash and all of that. What if you are a male or a female? So it's true that husband and wife fulfill mitzvahs for each other, yeah? But we could take it a step further also and say, what if a person never got married? So the souls never reunited. How are they going to fulfill their mitzvahs? What if you lived in a time when the Beis Hamikdash stood? Or what if you lived in a time when the Beis Hamikdash didn't stand? What if you lived inside Eretz Yisrael where certain mitzvahs apply? And what if you live outside Eretz Yisrael where certain mitzvahs don't apply? That's the nature, that's your life. What are you going to do? You can't possibly fulfill. No human being can possibly fulfill all the 613. Impossible in one lifetime. Why? Because there are limitations. You're a Kohen, you're not a Kohen. You're a Levi, you're not a Levi. You're a king, you're not a king. You're a man, you're not a man. You're a woman, you're not a woman. You're an adult, you're not a, some children, some souls never live to adulthood. Therefore, says the Zohar, "V'lachein tzarich lihiyos begilgul." Sometimes you have to be in a gilgul, in a reincarnation, or in a, I don't know what it's called, impregnation. There's a better word for it. I forgot the better word for it, but it means sometimes the soul needs to be reborn completely. That's called Gilgul, the circle of life. The soul starts in heaven, lives its life on earth, goes to heaven, and then comes back for a second life on earth. Probably a few times, most likely quite a few times. That's called Gilgul, from the word Galgal, which means a cycle or an orbit. The soul has its orbit: heaven, earth, heaven, earth, heaven, earth. We'll talk about that in the JLI class, Mitzvah Hashem, coming up this week. We spoke
Yeah, I
about
just read something about that. It said it only goes 3 times.
there are many sources that tell us conflicting things, and it's the job of the mystics to sort it out. So that's called Gilgul. And then there's also a thing called Ibur. Ibur means where one nefesh, one soul, takes a ride in another soul just for the duration of the mitzvah, and then the soul will have completed its purpose. One easy example, beautiful example is, we just read recently, it feels recent, it wasn't recent. We just read recently the song At the Sea. Yeah, the Jewish people came across Egypt, and Miriam danced with the ladies, and Moshe led the men. And they sang a song. There was in the world a single Jewish adult who was not there at the sea to sing and praise Hashem then, and to dance.
Sarah. Is it Sarah? No, who was born as they went into Eretz Yisrael?
Miriam.
No.
Yocheved was born as they entered it, but we're talking about on the way out.
No. Oh.
As they were leaving Egypt, and they passed through the split sea, the Jewish people sang and praised Hashem in a tremendous display of gratitude, which was very, very holy. There was one adult Jew who was not there.
Oh, I don't.
One adult Jew who was not there.
Don't know.
And she is Moshe Rabbeinu's wife, Tzipora.
Huh.
Because when Moshe Rabbeinu got the call, go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh, let my people go, he packed up his wife and kids on the donkey, and they rode off to Eretz Mitzrayim, and Aharon HaKohen he comes out to meet them. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, they hug and they kiss, and they say, been so long, nice to see you, brother. And Aharon turns and sees the family and says, who's this? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is my family. I'm bringing them with me to Egypt. And Aaron says, are you nuts? We have enough Jews suffering in Egypt. You want to bring more? Send them home. And he did. Moshe Rabbeinu sent Tzipora and the boys home. So that when they went through the Red Sea, Tzipora was in Midian, in the home of Yisrael, waiting for the call to come and join the Jewish encampment at the foot of Mount Sinai, which she did eventually. Yisrael came and delivered her. Yeah. But she wasn't there to sing the song. And therefore, her soul was lacking something. And therefore, we read in the Haftorah of that parsha a song that was sung by a lady, prophetess, called Devorah. After the battle of Barak and Devorah against whichever country that was, I forget, they sang, Devorah led the people in a song. This is called Shiras Devorah. And the soul of Tzipora entered the soul of Devorah just for the duration of that song, and thereby she perfected herself and fulfilled her entire purpose, and then graduated to wherever in Gan Eden she was supposed to go. That's called Ibur, riding. One soul will be filled with the spirit of another soul, and together they'll perform the mitzvah. In order that there should be a garment for each and every soul from each of the 613 mitzvahs. Why do you need garments of the soul? Because if you are lacking a single mitzvah, you are lacking one of the garments. What is a garment for the soul? The garment for the soul is how you will perceive God in the world to come. The soul itself does not have the ability to perceive God. Although it is divine, although it is holy, although it is sacred, although it is a veritable piece of Hashem, it is still an independent being. And an independent being is incapable of perceiving the true oneness of Hashem. In order to perceive the true oneness of Hashem, you have to be nothing. You have to be part of that oneness. And a soul is not capable of completely dissolving into oneness with Hashem, except in the performance of a mitzvah, where God himself is actually present in the performance of a mitzvah. So it's only through the garments of the mitzvah that the soul is capable of really perceiving the true oneness of Hashem. And that's why every soul needs every garment, so that it's not missing any of the experiences of the divine in the world to come. We continue in the footnote from Torah Or, page 98. Through the deeds, the act of the mitzvah, the action of the mitzvah makes a garment for the lower Gan Eden. And through the intention of the mitzvah, which takes place in your mind and heart, the soul is given a garment through which it can perceive the divine in the higher levels of Gan Eden. And that's why Bikesh Moshe likones la'aretz. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu fought so hard to be allowed to enter the Holy Land. Moshe Rabbeinu's soul, believe it or not, is lacking. And he could not fathom the thought that his soul should arrive in the world of souls lacking, missing garments, unable to perceive God in certain possible ways. And so Moshe Rabbeinu fought so hard to go into the land of Eretz Yisrael, so he should be able to fulfill the mitzvahs that are limited only to the land of Eretz Yisrael. He begged Hashem, let me go in, I'll perform the mitzvahs, and then you can have me. Was
Moshe ever reincarnated in another being so that he could fulfill all of the mitzvahs?
It's a very good question. The spirit of Moshe is reincarnated in every leader of every generation. But I don't know if through that he fulfills his mitzvahs. I'm not sure the nature of that reincarnation. So I can't answer your question. I don't know. If there are sources about it, I have not seen them.
So then it begs the question, has anyone ever achieved the completion of all of the mitzvot? It seems very sad. I mean, Moshe was the greatest.
Right. You understand, this is why reincarnation is a basic principle of Jewish faith. Because we know that if Hashem gave us a mitzvah, if Hashem gave us a mission, he also gives us the ability to fulfill that mission. And because no matter how great you are, there's always something you have not fulfilled.
Torah never dies.
The Torah never dies, true, but the soul needs to be allowed to come back to earth to fulfill those portions of the Torah that it had not fulfilled. That's an argument that I heard this morning. Fine. Another explanation is, that Another explanation is like this. I don't know if it answers the question, but it's a fantastic explanation. We'll read a little more of the Tanya. You'll all forgive me. We're going a few minutes over because we got a late start and we're on a roll. We'll read a little more Tanya and then we'll read a little more Torah. So what we described here is the general investment of the body. The general investment of the Eser Koiches HaNefesh, the 10 soul powers, into the 3 garments of the soul. Generally speaking, the intellectual soul powers are clothed in the thought garment. The emotional soul powers generally are clothed in the speech garment, and the lowest three, or the expressive, I guess it's lowest 4, the expressive soul powers are clothed generally in the garment of action. So, generally speaking, but now in a more specific way, in a more particular way, ube piratus, more specifically, bechines chachma bina vidas shebenafshoi melubashois bahasogas hatayra. The intellectual faculties, the intellectual soul powers, which are chachma, bina, vadas, and we went through it at length trying to describe each one last week. They are of the soul. They are clothed in the understanding and grasping of Torah, meaning shehu masig, that he grasps and understands b'pshat remez derush and soid on all the levels of understanding of Torah, kifi yechelis hasagasai, according to his ability, according to his physical, mental capacity, v'sheiresh nafshe l'mayla, as well as the source of his soul on high will also help to determine which portions of Torah are relevant for each person. Let's pause in the translation of Tanya for a second and jump to the section from Torah Or. And as I was going to try, we'll try to translate it. I never got around to it. I apologize. This is from a Maimer on Megillas Esther. And it says like this, Ein kol hasogis shel haneshamis shovim. Not all souls will grasp Torah the same way. They're not all equal. V'yesh mehem. There are some among them. V'yesh bahem madregos umaylos.
Can you put them back on there?
Sorry, where is that noise coming from?
Coming from us.
Just mute the microphone, please.
Whoever just signed
I
off.
pressed the microphone. No, I unpressed it. That thing there.
Okay, thank you. Back to the Torah. Ein kol hasaga shel neshama shavim. The grasp of all the souls is not the same. Yesh bahem madregas umaylos. There are many levels in them. How many? Ein kates, endless levels. K'maimer Razal, as it says, shekol tzadik nichve michupas shel chaverei. Each and every righteous person is burned by the chuppah of his friend. Burned means he's burning up with envy, with jealousy about the spiritual capacity of his friend. Each and every tzaddik, every single level of tzaddik, is burning up with envy and jealousy from the level of the other tzaddikim. Envy in spiritual life is great because it spurs you to do more. V'lochein, therefore, mi shedai loy beperek achas shachris pecher achad b'arve is somebody for whom learning a single chapter of halacha in the morning and a single chapter of halacha at night is enough for him, according to halacha. Shedai loy b'mashal zeh, right? This note comes in the middle of an explanation about the nature of mashal, of analogies. We'll leave it on the side for now. That means he is required, the fact that he's required only to study one chapter in the morning and one chapter at night is because that's the level of his soul. That's the level that his soul is capable of perceiving, of grasping, of understanding. If his soul was capable of more, he would be obligated to do more. How do you know what the level of your soul is? How do you know how much Torah you're obligated to study? Answer, how much are you practically able to study? Not conveniently able, practically able. If a person is practically able to study only an hour in the morning and an hour at night, then that is all that his soul is capable of. The fact that that's your life is the greatest proof that from Hashem, that's the level that you got. If you practically have more time for study, then that's a sign for you that your soul is on a higher level and you are capable and therefore obligated to study more. And each and every human individual has a different level, a unique level. And that's why it says in the note here that there are endless levels, level on top of level, of how much a person of how much a person's soul is capable of grasping. If a person is incapable of studying anymore, that is an indication that that's enough for him. Somebody who has the ability practically to study Torah, that is an indication that his soul is mibechina, is from a level sheyuchal lahasig harbe lemaila, that his soul is from a level that is capable of grasping much more. So when in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, you have your practical capacity to study. Let's read it again. He says, Kifi yecheles hasagase, according to his mental capacity, and according to the source of his soul, your mental capacity is the gauge for how you should know what is the capacity of your soul from its source. You don't have to become confused and say, well, what if my mental capacity doesn't keep up with the source of my soul? Or what if I imagine that my mental capacity far exceeds the source of my soul? I'll tell you a story. One story, also from Rabbi Silverberg, that the Alshich, who was a great commentator on the Torah, he lived in Israel at the same time as, he lived in Tzfat at the same time as the Arizal. The Alshich he lived in the same shul, he was the Chavrusa, he was a pal, a buddy with the Beis Yosef, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and with the Shaloh, who wrote the Shnei Luchas Habris. It was an amazing generation, at the same time as the Arizal and Moshe Cordovero and Chaim Vital. My goodness, it was a holy and powerful city at that time. And the Alshich saw all his buddies learning Kabbalah, and he went to he was not an expert in Kabbalah, he was an expert in Chumash, in the simple level, in explaining the Chumash on the simple level. And he went to the Arizal and asked permission to join his group. And the Arizal, of course, said, yes, this is the holy Alshich, it's no problem. And he sat in the lectures at the Arizal's yeshiva, and he fell asleep in the first lecture. And then he fell asleep in the second lecture. And he fell asleep in the third lecture, and he starts to feel bad. He's apologizing to the Arizal, and the Arizal says, don't worry about it. Clearly, this is not the level that your soul is on. Your soul is associated with the world of Pshat. And therefore, you're not being welcomed into the world of Sod. It's no problem. That's the root of your soul. But it has to be honest. It has to be real. By Farbrengen, the Rebbe once mentioned that I see people sleeping at during my talks. Yeah. So first I thought it was associated to the level of their souls. But then I saw that I'm speaking about the simple level and people are sleeping. And I speak about the second level and people are sleeping. I'm speaking about the third level, they're still sleeping. And I speak about the highest level, they're always sleeping. So it's not because of the source of their soul. It's a different problem. The point is that if a person has the capacity to study deeply and they do not, they are not fulfilling their obligation to learn. The Alter Rebbe says in the laws of Torah study, a person is obligated to study every dimension of Torah that they are capable of studying. Only then have they fulfilled their obligation to study Torah. Why? Because if that, let's tie these two teachings together. Why are you obligated to study every dimension of Torah that you're capable of? Because if you don't, you are not keeping up with your own potential. And that means that your soul will arise in the world of souls, or in Gan Eden, in Olam Haba, lacking some ability to perceive godliness and its experience of Hashem, its experience of the true oneness of Hashem will be incomplete. That's not right. Okay, we will continue Mitzvah Hashem next week. Thank you everyone for joining.